There is an old joke, fairly or unfairly labelled at the French, that goes, a young man is found guilty of murdering his parents and throws himself at the mercy of the French courts on the grounds that he is an orphan. One of the strange aspects of murder in a civilian setting is that in most cases the culprit and the victim actually know each other. Jealous husbands killing their wives is an obvious example. The killing of a child by one or more parents, or in extreme circumstances a stranger, fills us with horror and outrage. But why do we view the murder of a parent or parents by one or more of its siblings? Our parents give us life, or in the case of our step-parents, supported us. Should we not be grateful? Yet we view it as part of life. We read it in the newspapers or watch it in the news. But do we organise a manhunt or follow it avidly after the event? Once the deed is done, it falls from our consciousness until the end of the trial.
On the 7th of November 1952, a murder took place within a family home in Port Payne, 2 miles from St Austell, which is one of Cornwall's larger towns with a population of just under 20,000. Contrary to most outsiders' perceptions, it is not on the coast and is a centre for China clay mining. The father was Charles Gifford, a veteran of World War I of the Royal Flying Corps, and currently a senior partner of a local firm of solicitors, clerk to the social justices, and under-sheriff of Cornwall. He was also disliked locally. The mother, Elizabeth Gifford, was vice-chairwoman of the local Conservative Association and a keen bridge player. She was also well liked in the local community. The son, Miles Gifford, turned out to be a complete waster both at school and in later life. Oddly enough, he served below deck in the Navy between 1943 and 1947, and his behaviour was exemplary. Hopeless at school, but good at sports, especially cricket. He had a brother who was 3 years younger, called Robin. Relations between parents and son were not that good. An unsympathetic and brusque father who wanted the boy to stop believing he would be the next English cricketer to face Don Bradman and settle down as a solicitor. A sympathetic mother who forgave Miles for frequently stealing her jewellery and cashing money at every opportunity. Miles Gifford returned from London to Cornwall after wasting an inheritance and announced his intention to marry a girl called Gabrielle Vallance after a romance of only 6 weeks. When the father discovered this fact, he was not a happy bunny. But life goes on, and the parents and the prodigal son went out for lunch, after which the father returned to his office while the others returned home. The mother later went out on constituency business, leaving her son at home to consume copious amounts of whiskey. The father returned to the house some time later, and on opening his car door was struck on the back of the head by a blunt instrument by his son, which rendered him unconscious. When the mother returned home, she was completely unaware of what had happened, at which point her darling and misunderstood son smashed her violently on the back of the head. After seeming to have disposed of his parents and becoming an orphan, Miles rang Gabrielle and informed her of his intention to return to London. It is at this stage that the antics of the son, like something out of the board game Cluedo, become incredibly sinister. The father, meanwhile, had started to regain consciousness, and more blows were delivered which killed him. However, the mother was also recovering from the attack on her. Whilst she was still alive, her son took her by wheelbarrow to the edge of a nearby cliff, and she was thrown to her death. This was followed by a similar procedure for the now deceased father. Miles then proceeded to clean the house and the driveway to cover up his crime. Having seemingly covered his tracks, he took his father's car, his mother's jewellery again, and some clothes before driving off at high speed back to London. Later that evening, the live-in maid got back from a half-day holiday to see the prodigal son drive away from the house. If she had returned earlier, she may have been the third victim. One should bear in mind that driving through the night from Cornwall to London was a much more hazardous event than finding modern motorways using a sat-nav. The next day, Miles sold the jewellery and went with Gabrielle and his future mother-in-law to the cinema to see Charlie Chaplin's Limelight. After the show, Mrs. Vance left the two starstruck lovers, who went to a well-known pub, the Star in Cheshire Mews. Miles asked Gabrielle to marry him, and she replied in the affirmative, with the proviso that he got a regular job. After proposing, he calmly revealed that he had lost his parents through murdering them. Gabrielle could not believe that her fiancé was capable of such wickedness, dismissing it as some drunk madness. They finished off the night at the Prospect of Whitby pub, before he went back to the Regent's Palace Hotel. Meanwhile, back in sunny Cornwall, Miss Orchard, the maid, did not notice immediately that the parents were missing, as they often did not keep regular hours. Before retiring to bed, she noticed that certain lights were on, and, more disturbingly, Mrs. Gillard's outdoor coat and picnic basket that she took to Plymouth in the morning were in the kitchen. Certain household items were not in their usual place, and there were odd smears on the floor. She rang 2 hospitals to ascertain whether there had been an accident, and had a very restless night, and before dawn went to see her own fiancé. After a short discussion between them, they decided to call the police. At this stage there were no bodies, only scenes of unusual activity in the house, and the father's missing car. The police discovered some unusual tracks, which turned out to have been made by a wheelbarrow that meandered from the house into the countryside, which they followed to the cliffs. What they witnessed there was the body of a man lying on the beach below, next to a wheelbarrow. His brains had been dashed out and were splattered all over the rocks. Initially, it had been assumed that Mr. Gifford's killer had kidnapped the poor mother. However, the police followed further tracks that led to another cliff. Normally, any body that fell from that height would be washed out to sea, but unfortunately for Miles, the weather was calm, and Mrs. Gifford's battered corpse was found later, further up the beach. But where was the missing car? It had a special and distinctive number plate, ERL1, and with further investigation, London's finest were able to locate the vehicle and also Miles. He was promptly returned to Cornwall to face a trial which lasted for 3 days. Evidence emerged of Miles's state of mind. This was the only credible defence, as there was no smoking gun or eyewitness accounts to clear the young man, but enough circumstantial evidence to literally hang him. However, whilst Gabrielle, his fiancée, did not believe that he could undertake such a wicked act of patricide and matricide, his letter to her prior to becoming an orphan was read out in court. It included the immortal words that, short of doing him in, I see no future. In view of events, this would not have sat well with the jurors. Various people were called as witnesses as to his general behaviour, including his schoolmaster and a contemporary when he was at school. Needless to say, he certainly was portrayed as being like other boys. The defence tried the old low blood sugar strategy, but this was dismissed as he had just had a heavy lunch followed by copious amounts of alcohol in the afternoon. The principal medical officer used an old technique of starving him for 21 hours before determining whether his blood sugar levels fell below a certain amount. It turned out to be normal. The medical witnesses also could not agree on whether Miles was suffering from schizophrenia at the time of his parents' demise. It took the jury 35 minutes to arrive at their verdict of guilty, and Miles was driven to Hallfield Prison in Bristol to face his sentence. There were the usual appeals, including one from one of his uncles, but to no avail. On the 24th of February 1953, he was hanged. It is tempting to say that the murder of the mother must have influenced many minds. The father was clearly loathed in the community, and nobody had a good word to say about him. Now, John, there were twists and turns at every stage of this story. How do you view it?
If we examine the case, it is very difficult to have any sympathy over the father or the son. The father was essentially an insensitive brute, and one is left wondering the quality of mercy when he was sentencing people. Literally, nobody had a good word to say about him. Unfortunately, if the son had stayed in the Navy, these events would never have happened. He did not have a record for violence, and was popular on board. One of the curious aspects of war is that men are taken away from their normal environment and have to react to new surroundings. For some, it makes no difference to them, and for others, it changes their whole concept of life. Miles Clifford may have been a credit to king and country while serving in the Navy, but he soon reverted to bad habits of being demobbed. The mother was well liked in the community. If Miles had left earlier, she would have still been alive, and he would not have swung. If you would like to know more about this episode and the other West Country murders in this series, you can visit our website vintagemurders.uk or on our YouTube channel.